Is there an Eagles song that you'd be happy if you never heard again?
Oh, there are several. Most of them.
Hello, classic rock fans. Welcome back to my classic rock vlogs, featuring my hot takes on classic rock news. Today we're going to talk about the Eagles and their spring 2018 tour. The Eagles are an absolute juggernaut of a band, and losing a fundamental core key member like Glenn Frey made a lot of us think that that was the end of the band. In fact, shortly after Frey passed, Don Henley, who's the only other big fundamental key member, said that the Eagles would be done. But he said he's changed his mind, and they're going to go back out on the road for a full-on tour this spring. It was kind of surprising to see that the Eagles announced a tour and who they got to kind of fill the void that Glenn left. So let's talk about the real reason why they're touring. Let's not kid ourselves. This is not for the fans. This is not for keeping these songs alive. This is for one thing and one thing only. This is for money. Yes, money. It's always been about money for the Eagles. Every year they go out on the road, they're always in the top list of the highest grossing touring acts. And they have been that way since their reunion in 1994, the Hell Freezes Over reunion. When the Eagles go on tour, it means a massive machine has to get rolling. And a lot of people surrounding the tour are going to make a lot of money. So there's a lot of pressure on these guys to stay on the road so that gravy train keeps going. And the primary pressure point must come from their manager, Irving Azoff.
It really bothered me, just, you know, as a guy that's made his entire livelihood off of other people's talents.
Irving Azoff is one of the most notorious figures in music industry history, and he is incredibly good at what he does, and that is present a concert experience that fans will fork over tremendous amounts of money to experience. So as much as I hate that guy, I am also in awe of him. And now that Glenn's passed, I really think the decision to tour comes down to Don Henley. Don Henley is now the de facto leader of the Eagles. And I imagine that Irving presented him with a great plan, and he knows how much the Eagles are worth when they're on the road, and I suspect that the money was too good to turn down. Now, the third party that's important to keep in mind here is Glenn Frey's family. If Glenn Frey's family, for whatever reason, did not want the Eagles going on the road, I suspect that they might have been able to convince Henley not to. Or who knows, maybe they couldn't have. But it seems like they are all on board, not just for the money, even though, you know, they'd be poised to lose a lot of money if the Eagles didn't tour, but one of the people that will fill Glenn Frey's shoes is his own son, Deacon Frey. Deacon Frey is a young artist who I think has shown up at some Glenn Frey solo shows before, and I think it's probably a dream come true for that guy to step into his dad's role and play that music. And it must be great for his family to watch him do that. So I'm not surprised to see this tour announced. It means a lot of money for a lot of people, and it's an opportunity for Glenn Frey's family to see Deacon play on stage in his dad's band. So now that I think we know why, let's take a look at how they're going to do this tour. Like I said, some of Glenn's songs are going to be sang by his kid, Deacon, which is great. I think that lends a little bit of credibility to the band. I don't think it's tacky at all when classic rock artists invite their family to join the band. Van Halen has been playing with Eddie's son Wolfgang for like 10 years now, and I don't really object to that. So I wouldn't have a problem with Deacon doing Glenn's songs. But he's not the only one doing Glenn's songs. They also got country artist Vince Gill. Now, Vince Gill, from what I've read, is a highly respected artist in the country music community. He's won a lot of awards and is very well liked by critics, and of course fans of classic country. I've never heard of him, but that's not bad on him. That's just because I don't know a lot about that genre. What I did find interesting is Vince Gill was actually one of the artists who sang on the 1993 tribute album Common Thread, which was an Eagles cover record that was designed by Irving Azoff to whip up some interest in Eagles music in the early 90s when they were discussing potential reunion talks. So it's kind of cool to see that Vince Gill was someone who played a admittedly very small role in that process, kind of come into the Eagles' orbit now and take up part of Glenn's role. The song he sang on that album was I Can't Tell You Why, which ironically he will not be able to sing in concert now because that's a Timothy B. Schmidt song. So it's cool and all that he's got that connection, but for me that's not enough to warrant him being the guy to step into Glenn's shoes. I don't begrudge the Eagles for going on tour. In fact, I'd probably contemplate seeing them. I like the Eagles quite a bit. I saw them live in 2008, and that was a great show. Very expensive tickets, but still a great show and a long show, 3 hours, and most of that was hits. So I really can't complain, and I imagine you're still getting that same experience today. But one of the best parts of that show was the fact that Glenn Frey was on stage singing those songs. And I have nothing against Vince Gill, but he's an unknown to me, and I suspect he's an unknown to a lot of people going to these shows, or who would consider going to these shows. He seems fairly B-list, and I know that sounds disrespectful, but I don't mean it to be. He just doesn't strike me as a Glenn Frey level talent, or at least Glenn Frey level name recognition. He seems like a strange pick to me. That move strikes me as Vince Gill is an artist that Don Henley really likes and respects, and probably comes cheap. If I had to guess, I imagine he does not command a big paycheck. I'm just not on board with that pick. It seems a little disappointing given the stature of that band. A couple of years ago, when AC/DC was on tour, Brian Johnson, lead singer Brian Johnson, got sick and had to bow out. They rescheduled the dates, and they filled his spot with Axl Rose. In the world of classic rock, Axl Rose is a bona fide A-list superstar, and although you might have been disappointed that it wasn't Brian Johnson singing during those shows, I honestly don't think anyone can genuinely complain about Axl Rose filling in AC/DC. When the Eagles announced their tour, honestly, when they announced earlier shows that they did last year, I sort of expected kind of that same level of replacement. So the question you might have for me is, well, who would be a good enough replacement for Glenn Frey? And I'm hesitant to answer that because I don't know if Glenn Frey is just that replaceable. It would be like replacing Keith Richards and the Rolling Stones. I just don't think it can be easily done. When I think of who would have been like good enough where I guess I wouldn't complain or I wouldn't object or I wouldn't make this video, honestly, there's only two names that come to mind for me that are realistic. And only one's realistic. Honestly, one maybe could have worked, but I'm sure the other one was totally off the table. One of the names would be Jackson Browne. Jackson Browne, he filled in for Glenn Frey when the Eagles played the Grammys in 2016, and when they did their tribute to Glenn Frey. It was right after he died, and that performance made a lot of sense. They played Take It Easy, which is the song that Jackson Browne mostly wrote himself, but then finished the song with Glenn Frey, and then he gave the song to the Eagles, and that was like their first single off their first album. And I know that Glenn and Jackson Browne were very close friends in the early 70s, and they were always friends, and it seemed like, yeah, Jackson Browne's the right guy to sing Glenn's part in this Grammys tribute. Is Jackson Browne really off the table for the Eagles now? If the Eagles approached Jackson Browne now and said, hey man, we're going to do a spring tour, and we want to know if you would like to do some of Glenn's songs, would he have said no? You know, I wonder if they did approach him. But he seemed like the obvious fit. There's a history there. He's incredibly talented. I think some big Eagles fans know about that connection. It would have made sense. But maybe he didn't go for it. And I imagine he would have cost the Eagles a lot more than Vince Gill does. That's just my assumption. The only other name that I think would have been like appropriate to fill in for Glenn Frey would have been Bob Seger. Glenn Frey wrote Heartache Tonight with Bob Seger. They're both from Detroit. They were friends when they were young. Glenn Frey was originally supposed to sing Shakedown on Beverly Hills Cop 2, but when he fell ill, he called Bob Seger, who then sang the song instead. So there's a strong friendship there, and if you listen to Bob Seger talk about Glenn Frey in any interview, he gets very emotional, and he talks about how much Glenn's friendship meant to him. And he performs very emotionally. So I have to imagine that if Bob Seger, even though he doesn't sound like Frey, if he joined the band, I think you would have a very emotional performance. But Bob Seger is also an A-list touring act, and I suspect that either he would not have been interested in doing that, at least for that many shows, and if he was interested, he would have been very, very expensive. So, admittedly, that is just a fantasy on my end. I don't think that would have realistically happened. But he did come out and sing Heartache Tonight with the Eagles at their the Classic West Festival last year, which is that music festival that Irving Azoff put together as a response to that Desert Trip music festival in 2016. So ultimately, my point here is that it's really tough to fill the void that Glenn Frey left, and I don't think that Vince Gill is the right name to do that job. I think Jackson Browne would have been a better name. I think Bob Seger would have been a crazy, awesome pick for that. But whoever it is, it's probably not Vince Gill. And especially not because of how expensive Eagles tickets are. If you want to get to the core of my complaint with the Eagles going on tour, it's that they're still charging outrageous ticket prices. And yes, I know there's a market for it, but the bottom line is, no matter how well they play, they're not going to be a better show or a better concert experience than when they were with Glenn Frey. There might be nights where they're almost as good, or just good on their own, but they're not going to get to that same level of enjoyability as when Glenn Frey was there. I mean, unless you're a fan that like weirdly dislikes Glenn Frey, you know, you're missing an integral piece. And their ticket prices, of course, do not reflect that, because why would they voluntarily lower the ticket prices? Why would they voluntarily leave money on the table? That band is not going to make that decision. So do I begrudge the Eagles for going on tour? No, I understand why they're doing it. Am I going to go see them if I have the chance? Probably not. I know how much those tickets are, and I just don't feel it's appropriate to charge what they normally charge, given that they're not going to deliver what they normally deliver. They can't possibly do that anymore because an integral band member is missing. Nothing against Vince Gill, honestly. And I know it sounds like I hate the guy, but I honestly have no problem with him. I know he's an incredibly talented guy, but he just doesn't have the same appeal as the one he's supposed to replace. Also a minor point here, but whenever the Eagles go on one of their cross-country mega tours, that keeps the solo members of the Eagles off the road of their own tours. You know, if the Eagles are doing shows, you're not going to see any Don Henley solo shows, or Joe Walsh solo shows, or Timothy B. Schmidt solo shows. And as someone who likes Don Henley music and Joe Walsh, I would like the opportunity to see those guys, honestly, now more than I'd like the opportunity to see this patchwork quilt of the Eagles. So with all that said, I will just add that if you love the Eagles and you love their music and you just want to hear the songs, you don't care who's singing them, then by all means, go enjoy the tour. I'm sure that, I mean, if the Eagles are, if nothing else, they are very good at what they do. So I don't think you're going to get a bad show out of them. But I just feel for the premium we as fans have to pay on their tickets, they're not delivering the same concert experience that we have come to expect from them at this point. And that's why I probably won't go see them again. But I still hope I can see a Don Henley show or a Joe Walsh show. And I'm sure there are fans who would like to see a Timothy B. Schmidt or even a Vince Gill solo show. But there's just not as much money in it unless they're on the road as the big mega production of the Eagles. And I guess a final point I might make is, does touring without Glenn Frey hurt their legacy? To which I would say no, I don't think it does at all. I think that's a really difficult question, and it's something I want to get into in a later video. But now that all these bands are at or beyond the age of retirement, and some notable figures in classic rock have passed away, keeping classic rock alive through these next 10, 15, 20, 50, 100 years, the bands are going to have to get creative because they're not going to live forever. So how do they keep their songs alive forever? Part of that involves keeping a band with that name on the road. It really just highlights an opportunity to have an interesting discussion about what classic rock bands are supposed to do once they start losing key members to either death or retirement. So that's all I got there. So if you're a fan of classic rock, I just want to say thank you for watching this video, and I would invite you to check out the other shows I have on this channel. My classic rock show is called Play That Rock and Roll, and that's a show that breaks down artist histories, top 10 lists, album reviews, and their scripted videos with lots of video and music in them. That's the show to watch if you're a classic rock fan. So please hit subscribe, feel free to comment below, and stay tuned because I will definitely be back with some more classic rock hot takes. Thanks for watching. See you next time.
There was no one quite like